My parents faked a medical emergency to steal my $175,000 wedding fund for sister's honeymoon, so I married in secret and left them broke. I'm Jess, 28, female, and I recently got engaged to my amazing fiancé Ryan, 29, male. We've been together for 4 years and are about to tie the knot, even if it's not exactly what I had originally envisioned. I thought I'd share my story here, partly because I need to vent and partly because maybe someone else has gone through something similar and can relate. Growing up, I always imagined my wedding would be this magical day surrounded by friends and family, with every detail perfectly reflecting my personality and our relationship. I know, super cliché, but I think a lot of us have that idea. Ryan and I talked about our wedding plans pretty early on in our relationship. We both wanted something simple but elegant, where the focus was on celebrating with people we cared about rather than putting on a show. We landed on the idea of having the wedding in the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. It's a place we both love, peaceful, scenic, and kind of romantic in its own way. We'd visited a few vineyards and rustic venues there during a couple of weekend trips and immediately fell in love with the vibe. It just felt like us. The plan was to save up and have the wedding of our dreams without going into debt. I work as a nurse and Ryan as a software developer, so while we make decent money, we're not exactly rolling in it. Still, we're good with budgeting and decided to prioritize this. Over the last few years, I'd been setting aside as much as I could from every paycheck. Ryan pitched in too, but we agreed early on that since this was something I'd been saving for before we even got engaged, I'd cover most of the wedding costs. I know some people would find that weird, but it worked for us. By the time we got engaged, I had saved $175,000. It wasn't just for the big day itself. I wanted to cover all the little extras too, helping out with travel costs for a few close friends who live far away, maybe splurging on a live band instead of a DJ, doing a fun post-wedding brunch for everyone the next day, going on a honeymoon, and maybe even helping with the down payment for our future house. The plan was to keep the guest list small, around 80 to 100 people, and focus on quality over quantity. We started looking into venues in the Asheville area, and I can't tell you how exciting it was to actually tour some of the places I'd been dreaming about for years. There was one in particular, a vineyard with sweeping mountain views, that I just fell in love with. Ryan liked it too, but he's much more laid back about this stuff. He kept saying, "Whatever makes you happy, babe," which, let's be honest, is exactly what you want to hear when you're planning a wedding. At the same time, I started diving into all the other details. I was working with a wedding planner to map out the decor and had started picking out the color scheme and floral arrangements. Ryan joked that I had more Pinterest boards than anyone on the planet, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. I'd spent so much time dreaming about this day, and I wanted it to be perfect. But it wasn't just about the aesthetics or the venue. I wanted the day to feel meaningful and personal. One of the ideas I had was to write little notes for each guest and leave them at their seats during the reception, thanking them for being part of our lives. I also planned to include some nods to my late grandparents, who were a huge part of my childhood and always supported me in everything I did. For example, my grandmother's favorite flower was lily of the valley, so I wanted to include it in my bouquet. Ryan was on board with all of it, but kept reminding me not to stress out too much. He's really good at grounding me when I start getting carried away. There was one night when I was flipping through wedding magazines, trying to decide between 3 different photographers, and he just grabbed my hand and said, "Jess, this isn't about which photographer gets the perfect shot. It's about us getting married and starting our life together. That's the part that matters." Of course he was right, but I still wanted the pictures anyway. Things were coming together nicely. We set the date for late October, hoping to catch the peak fall foliage. My dress shopping trip with my best friend Lauren was one of the highlights of the whole process. I found the dress. I remember standing in front of the mirror, teary-eyed, thinking, this is really happening. Ryan's family was also super supportive. His mom, Sharon, offered to help with the rehearsal dinner, and his dad even volunteered to build a custom wooden arch for our ceremony. It felt like everyone was on the same page and genuinely excited for us. My family, on the other hand, was complicated. My parents were happy for us, or at least they said they were, but they weren't as involved as I'd hoped. My mom kept making little comments like, "Do you really need to spend that much on flowers, or I just don't get why you need a destination wedding when you could do something simple at home." It wasn't mean-spirited exactly, but it felt dismissive, like she didn't understand why this was so important to me. Then there was my sister Emily. She's 25 and, got married last year in a quick courthouse ceremony. She and her husband Jason didn't have the money for anything fancy, which was totally fine, but I could tell she was jealous of what Ryan and I were planning. She'd make little digs like, "Must be nice to have all that saved up," or "Guess some people get all the luck." At the time, I brushed it off, figuring she was just feeling a little insecure, but looking back, there were definitely red flags I should have paid more attention to. By the time summer rolled around, we were in full planning mode. I'd locked in the venue, caterer, and photographer. My florist had sent me some beautiful mock-ups for the table arrangements, and I was in love with how everything was shaping up. I'd even started working on a playlist for the reception because I wanted to make sure there was a good mix of music for everyone to enjoy. It felt like everything was finally falling into place. Ryan and I would talk about the wedding over dinner, imagining how the day would unfold. We'd joke about how I'd probably cry during the vows and how he'd mess up the first dance because he has 2 left feet. It was exciting to think about starting this new chapter of our lives together. Of course, life has a funny way of throwing wrenches into your plans. I had no idea at the time that everything I'd been working toward was about to be completely derailed. So one Saturday afternoon, out of nowhere, my mom called me, and the conversation took a completely unexpected turn. For context, my mom isn't the overly dramatic type. She's pretty straightforward and doesn't really go overboard with stuff. So when she called me sounding panicked, my first thought was, oh no, something serious must have happened. She told me my dad had been dealing with some sudden health issues. Apparently he'd been having chest pains, and after seeing a specialist, they found something wrong with one of his heart valves. According to Mom, the doctor said he'd need immediate surgery to replace it. She told me the procedure wasn't fully covered by their insurance and the out-of-pocket expenses would be around $125,000. I remember standing in the kitchen with my phone pressed to my ear, just stunned, like I couldn't process it right away. She went on to say that they'd been scrambling to figure out how to pay for it, but they couldn't come up with the money on their own. That's when she asked me if I could help. Now, I don't know how other people would feel in that moment, but for me the answer was immediate. Of course I'd help. This was my dad's health we were talking about. She told me they didn't have time to wait because the surgery needed to happen ASAP. She sounded so stressed, and I could hear how worried she was about Dad. I didn't even stop to question it. I just said, yeah, of course, whatever you need. I transferred the money that same day, $125,000 to be exact. It was a huge chunk of my wedding savings, but I figured I still had $50,000 left, and Ryan and I could make that work. Maybe we'd have to scale things back a little, but none of that mattered compared to my dad's health. I thought, it's just money. You can always make more money, but you can't replace people. After that, I started checking in on my parents more often. I'd go over to their house after work to see how Dad was. He was always lying down in bed or sitting in his recliner, looking kind of tired, but not terrible. I brought him a few things to cheer him up, like some books and a puzzle I thought he might enjoy. I even offered to drive him to follow up appointments, but Mom told me that wasn't necessary because she had everything under control. At first, I didn't think much of it. My parents are pretty independent, so I figured they just didn't want to bother me. But after a couple of weeks, something started to feel off. Like Dad didn't look sick enough to me. I don't mean that in a weird way, but for someone who'd supposedly just had major heart surgery, he seemed way too normal. He was up and moving around, eating regular meals, and even going out to his workshop in the garage to tinker with his tools. I asked my mom about it a few times. Are you sure he's okay? Shouldn't he be resting more? She kept brushing me off, saying he was just recovering quickly because he's always been a strong guy. But that didn't sit right with me. I've worked in healthcare long enough to know that heart surgery recovery doesn't look like that. Even in the best-case scenario, there are weeks of rehab, dietary restrictions, and constant follow-ups. Another thing that bugged me was how vague she was about the whole situation. Every time I asked for details about the surgery, like which hospital he went to or the name of the surgeon, she changed the subject. When I asked to see the medical bills or any paperwork, she'd say, "Oh, I'll show you later, it's all filed away right now." At one point, I asked her why Dad wasn't seeing a cardiologist for follow-ups, and she told me they were doing everything through his primary care doctor instead. That didn't make sense to me, but I didn't push too hard because I didn't want to seem like I was doubting them. The weirdest part was that Emily hadn't been over to visit at all. I brought it up with my mom, and she said, "Oh, we told her not to come. She's got enough on her plate, and we don't want her worrying." That made me feel, well, kind of crappy, honestly. Like, why was it okay for me to be worried sick and running myself ragged trying to help them, but Emily got a free pass? I figured it was just Mom being overprotective of her baby as usual. Then one day, Emily called me while I was driving home from work. She sounded all chipper and happy, which caught me off guard because I'd assumed she'd been just as worried as I was about Dad. I asked her why she hadn't been by to see him, and she was like, "Oh, I've been busy, but I talked to Mom and she said everything's fine." She even said Dad was doing so much better now. I pressed her for more details, and she finally admitted she hadn't actually talked to Dad at all. She'd just been getting updates only from Mom. That didn't sit right with me, so I told her she should swing by the house and see for herself. She gave me some excuse about being swamped with work and promised to visit soon, but something about her tone made me feel like she wasn't being completely honest. The next time I went to my parents' house, I asked Mom directly if Emily had come by, and she said no. When I asked why, she got all defensive and said, "She's got a lot going on right now, you know how she is." That didn't explain anything, but I let it go because I didn't want to start an argument. Looking back, I can't believe I didn't connect the dots sooner. At the time, I just chalked it up to my family being the way they always are, kind of scattered and not great at communicating. But there were so many little things that didn't add up. Why didn't Dad have any follow-up appointments? Why wasn't Emily worried enough to check in? And why did Mom get so cagey every time I asked to see proof of the medical expenses? I think the moment I really started to question everything was when I overheard my dad on the phone one day. I was in the kitchen and he was in the living room talking to someone. He sounded totally fine, laughing, joking, even making plans to go out to lunch with one of his friends later that week. It just didn't line up with the story I'd been told. After that, I started to feel this nagging sense of doubt. But at the same time, I didn't want to believe my parents could be lying to me. I mean, who lies about something like that? Turns out the answer is my parents. But I wouldn't figure that out until much later. So after weeks of going back and forth to check on my dad and trying to shake off this weird gut feeling, I finally got some clarity on what was actually going on. It all started when I was on the phone with my sister Emily. She'd just gotten back from her honeymoon with her husband Jason, and she was raving about how amazing the trip was. Now, I knew they had been planning to go on a honeymoon eventually, but this sounded way more extravagant than anything they could realistically afford. Emily mentioned Paris first, which didn't surprise me. Paris is classic, right? But then she kept going. Rome, Santorini, Dubai, and even the Maldives. She started telling me about staying in overwater bungalows, first-class flights, shopping sprees in designer stores, and Michelin-starred dinners. I remember just sitting there holding my phone thinking, what the actual hell? I tried to play it cool and asked how they'd managed to pull off such a big trip. That's when she said something that made my stomach drop. She told me, "Oh, Mom and Dad surprised us with it. They said it was their wedding gift to us. Can you believe it?" At first, I didn't even know how to respond. I just kind of laughed nervously and said, "Wow, that's really generous of them." Inside, I was spiraling. My parents had been telling me for weeks that they were in financial trouble, that they couldn't afford my dad's surgery, that they needed my help. But somehow they had $125,000 to send Emily and Jason on a world tour? It didn't add up. After I got off the phone with Emily, I sat on the couch and just stared at the wall for a good 10 minutes trying to process everything. My heart was pounding and my brain was racing through every interaction I'd had with my parents over the past few months. I felt stupid. Like, how did I not see this coming? The next day, I decided to confront my mom. I drove over to their house after work and asked her point blank, "How were you able to pay for Emily's honeymoon?" She looked startled for a second, then quickly recovered and said, "Oh, it wasn't as expensive as you think. We used points and miles for most of it. I wasn't buying it." I told her Emily said you paid for first-class flights, luxury hotels, and shopping. Points don't cover all that. That's when she got defensive and started talking about how Emily had been going through a tough time and really needed a break. She said, "We just wanted to do something nice for her. She's been struggling since her wedding was so small and simple." At this point, I was fuming. Struggling? Emily had a perfectly fine courthouse wedding because that's what she and Jason chose. No one forced her to do that. Meanwhile, I had been saving every spare penny for years to pay for my own wedding, and now that money was gone because they lied to me about Dad's health. I asked her straight up, "Did Dad even need surgery, or was that just a lie to get my money?" She didn't answer right away, which told me everything I needed to know. Finally, she said, "It wasn't a lie. He did have some health issue, but it wasn't as urgent as we made it sound." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had admitted they had exaggerated the situation to get me to hand over the money, knowing full well that they were planning to use it for Emily's honeymoon. I told her I felt completely betrayed. You knew how important that money was to me. You knew I was saving it for my wedding, and you just took it for Emily. She tried to justify it by saying that I still had $50,000 left, and that Ryan and I could easily make it work with that. She said, "You're young, you're successful, and you've got your whole life ahead of you. Emily needed this more than you do right now." I don't even know how to explain the mix of emotions I felt in that moment. It was like every insecurity I'd ever had about being the less favored child was suddenly validated. Growing up, Emily always got more attention, more praise, more everything. I thought maybe I was just imagining it, but now it was clear as day. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. I left their house feeling completely numb. When I got home, Ryan could tell right away that something was wrong. I sat him down and told him everything about the fake emergency, the stolen money, and Emily's lavish honeymoon. He was furious. "I can't believe they would do that to you," he said. Ryan's immediate reaction was to call a lawyer. He wanted to find out if we could sue my parents to get the money back. I told him it would probably be a waste of time because there was no paper trail. Everything had been verbal. My parents never put anything in writing, and I didn't have any texts or emails to prove they'd lied. Ryan said, "We can't just let them get away with this." The worst part was, deep down, I felt guilty. I felt guilty for being mad at my parents, guilty for wanting to get my money back, and even guilty for resenting Emily. She didn't know where the money came from. As far as she was concerned, Mom and Dad were just being generous. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about how unfair it all was. I'd worked so hard to save that money, and now it was gone. I spent the next few days going back and forth in my head trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to just cut my losses and move on. Another part of me wanted to confront Emily and tell her the truth, but mostly I just felt exhausted. I didn't have the energy to fight with my family, but I also couldn't pretend everything was okay. Eventually, Ryan convinced me to at least talk to a lawyer for advice. He said, even if we can't get the money back, we need to know what our options are. I agreed, but in the back of my mind I still felt like this was a battle I couldn't win. For now, I've decided to put some distance between myself and my parents. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's clearly not. They lied to me, stole from me, and didn't even seem to feel bad about it. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive them. I'm really at my lowest now. Your words can help me somehow. Please tell me what you think. If anyone has gone through a similar experience, how did you react? I'll update you if anything comes up. Update 1. Hi again. It's been a while since I posted, and wow, I did not expect so many people to respond. I've read through your comments, and I appreciate all the advice, kind words, and even the tough love. One comment really stood out to me. It said something like, "Your wedding isn't about impressing anyone or proving a point. It's about celebrating the love you and Ryan share." Focus on that. That really hit home because I'd been so caught up in the betrayal and anger that I lost sight of what the day was supposed to be about. Another comment asked about our wedding plans and how we were going to make it work after everything that happened. So here's how we figured it out. And it turned out better than I could have ever imagined. I was crushed, but I still had $50,000 left, and Ryan and I decided we'd do the best we could with what we had. I'll be honest, it was hard to let go of the vision I'd been dreaming of. The vineyard in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the live band, the elaborate floral arrangements. It all felt out of reach. But once we started talking about alternatives, I realized that scaling back didn't mean giving up. Ryan suggested we keep the guest list small, around 50 people. With a smaller guest list, we needed a smaller venue. That's when Ryan's coworker James came through for us. His family owns a barn that they've converted into an event space, and he offered to let us use it for free. I was hesitant at first. It wasn't the glamorous vineyard I'd envisioned, but Ryan convinced me to at least go check it out. As soon as I stepped onto the property, I knew it was perfect. It felt warm and inviting, like the kind of place where you could laugh, dance, and make real memories. Once we had the venue, everything else started falling into place. I scaled back my original plans for decor and went with a minimalist approach. For food, we skipped the fancy sit-down dinner and went with a buffet of Southern comfort food, fried chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens, cornbread, the works. Everyone loved it. We also decided against a traditional wedding cake and did a dessert bar with pies, cookies, and cupcakes instead. It was less formal, but so much more fun. Plus, who doesn't love pie? The wedding itself was everything I could have hoped for. Now here's where things get interesting. A few days before the wedding, my parents reached out to Ryan. They didn't call or text. They actually showed up at his workplace. I didn't even know about it at the time because Ryan decided not to tell me until after the wedding. He knew it would stress me out, and honestly, I'm glad he kept it to himself. So what happened? They apparently ambushed him, demanding to know why they hadn't been invited to the wedding. Ryan, being the calm and collected guy he is, handled it perfectly. He told them he'd see what he could do, but said he needed to understand the full story first. Then he tricked them into confessing everything. He got them to admit that they'd lied about my dad's health, taken the money for Emily's honeymoon, and justified it by saying I wouldn't mind because Jess can always make more money. And here's the best part. Ryan recorded the whole conversation. I don't know how he kept a straight face while they were talking, but he did. He decided to keep the recording to himself until after the wedding because he didn't want to ruin our big day with more drama. When he told me about it after the fact, I was both shocked and incredibly grateful. He handled the whole thing so much better than I ever could have. Now that the wedding is over, we're figuring out what to do with the recording. Ryan thinks we should talk to a lawyer and see if there's a way to get my money back. I'm still processing everything, but I know one thing for sure. I'm done letting my parents take advantage of me. They made their choices, and now they'll have to deal with the consequences. For now, Ryan and I are just enjoying being newlyweds. We're planning a little getaway to the Pacific Northwest. Nothing fancy, just a road trip with stops at Mount Rainier and Cannon Beach. It feels right for us, simple and low-key but full of meaning, kind of like our wedding. Thanks to everyone who commented on my last post and helped me see what really mattered. I'll update again if there's any movement on the legal side, but for now I'm just focusing on this new chapter with Ryan. Update 2. Hi. I wanted to thank everyone who followed along with my earlier posts and shared advice, support, or even just kind words. I honestly didn't think my story would resonate with so many people, but it's been a comfort knowing I'm not alone in dealing with family drama. Now that the wedding is behind us and things have settled down somewhat, I thought it was time to share the final chapter of this whole mess. After the wedding, I started thinking about how to move forward. Cutting ties with my parents and Emily felt right, but it didn't sit well with me that they'd just get away with what they'd done. They'd stolen $125,000 of my hard-earned savings to fund my sister's honeymoon, and their half-hearted excuses didn't erase the betrayal. Ryan and I decided to take some time to figure out our next steps. That's when my parents handed us the golden ticket. A few weeks after the wedding, I got an email from my mom. I guessed they were still trying to smooth things over or maybe just cover their tracks. In the email, she laid out their side of the story in painstaking detail, clearly trying to justify their actions. She wrote about how Emily had been struggling emotionally since her courthouse wedding, how they felt she deserved a beautiful honeymoon to make up for it, and how they believed I'd eventually forgive them because family always forgives. Okay, here's the thing. My mom outright admitted in the email that they had lied about Dad's health to get the money from me. She wrote something like, "We know you're upset about how we handled this, and we should have been more honest, but we didn't think you'd help us if we told you the truth." She even acknowledged that they had no intention of repaying me in full anytime soon, saying they'd get to it when we can. I sat there staring at the screen, equal parts furious and relieved. Furious that they were still doubling down on their awful behavior, but relieved because this email was exactly what we needed to move forward legally. Ryan was the one who pointed out how significant it was. Between the email and the recording he'd made, we now had concrete evidence that they'd lied, manipulated me, and misused the money. After consulting with a lawyer, we decided to pursue legal action against my parents. It wasn't an easy decision. I mean, who wants to sue their own family? But at the end of the day, this wasn't just about the money. It was about standing up for myself and holding them accountable. They'd crossed a line, and I couldn't just let it slide. The process itself was nerve-wracking. Our lawyer helped us file a civil lawsuit to recover the $125,000, citing fraud and misrepresentation. Once they were officially served, all hell broke loose. My mom called me repeatedly, leaving long voicemails about how she couldn't believe I'd take things this far. My dad tried to guilt-trip me, saying they were just trying to help Emily and didn't mean any harm. Emily, of course, took the opportunity to call me selfish and accuse me of ruining her happiness. I didn't respond to any of them. Ryan and I agreed to let the lawyers handle it. At that point, there was nothing left to say. The case moved faster than I expected, probably because the evidence was so clear-cut. Between the recording of their in-person confession and the email from my mom, their lies were undeniable. My parents' lawyer tried to argue that it was a family matter and didn't belong in court, but the judge didn't buy it. In the end, they were ordered to pay me back the full $125,000 plus a small amount of interest to cover the time I'd been without the money. I wish I could say it felt like a victory, but honestly, it was bittersweet. I got my money back, but I lost my relationship with my parents and sister in the process. Not that there was much left to salvage after everything they'd done, but it still hurts to know that my own family could treat me that way. They've since paid me back in installments as required by the court. I've been putting the money towards savings and our future plans, things that actually matter to Ryan and me. We decided not to use it for a delayed dream wedding or an over-the-top honeymoon. Instead, we're focusing on building the life we want together. One of the biggest takeaways for me is that family doesn't give people a free pass to treat you like garbage. Blood might be thicker than water, but respect and trust are what actually matter. I've also learned to lean on the people who truly support me. Ryan has been my rock through all of this, and I'm so grateful to have him by my side. His family has been amazing too. They've welcomed me with open arms and made me feel like I'm part of something solid and genuine. As for my parents and Emily, I've cut off all contact. They still try to reach out every now and then, usually through vague guilt-trippy text messages, but I don't respond. I've set my boundaries and I'm sticking to them. Maybe someday things will change, but for now I'm prioritizing my own peace of mind. If there's one thing I'd say to anyone in a similar situation, it's this. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, even when it's hard. Family can be messy and complicated, but that doesn't mean you have to accept toxic behavior or let people take advantage of you. You deserve respect, no matter who you're dealing with.